And he's going to share that story with you tonight. Without any further ado, before I introduce Jim, I want to introduce his gatekeeper, his wife, Ann. Thank you. Good afternoon, folks. Here we go.
How fun is this? I just put chocolate cake in my mouth. Hold on. This morning, Dave and Frank took us to the Pine Tree Elementary School in Monroe. And we had a very special, delightful time with 5th graders. And you have to prepare yourself when you're speaking to little people, right? Because you're never quite sure. Do they know who's coming and why he's coming? Or in this case, Frank and Jim both shared their stories of Guinness Book of World Records. Do I have that right? We all know that, right? We all know that Frank is in that book. Now I know 2 people who are in that book. Anyway, I shared with them as we left that it really doesn't matter in the whole scheme of things how fast you run, what kind of good grades you get, how well you play an instrument. What really matters as we live our lives here on this earth is that we would love one another. And Jim will share a little bit about the prayer that he said as a young man and how God answered that prayer in a mighty way. But how the real difference for us was when we came to know Christ as our personal Savior. And instead of being on a pedestal, I love when Frank, he said it this morning and he said it again. We all wanted to be the next Jim Ryan. You just don't even, when you're living 47 years with Jim Ryan as husband and wife, he is my husband. He is the father of our 4 children. He's the grandfather of our 12 grandchildren. So, to me, personally, I count it such a blessing, not that he was a fast runner, but that he has lived a life of full integrity and honesty and truthfulness and humility. And tonight you are going to hear from a man who lives his life at home the very same way he lives his life before all of you. And for this, I have been a wonderful recipient of his love and his protection. So tonight, Frank introduced the runner, Jim Ryan, and the congressman. Steve mentioned the congressman, Jim Ryan. But I am going to introduce you to my most favorite friend, to the best husband that anybody could ever be married to the most awesome father that any child would ever want to have, and to an absolutely out of this world grandfather who loves his grandchildren, prays for them. So I present to you, see if you don't agree with me at the end of the evening. God bless you. Thank you so much for having us.
I have to get my wires connected here.
All right, this minute we're getting wires connected.
I don't think they're all connected yet. Hey,
Okay.
thanks, honey. Wow, when you get an introduction like that, you should probably sit down and call it an evening, right? What a way to start. Well, let me just tell one quick story about my wife, because somebody asked tonight how we met. We actually met, by the way, those 2 tables back there, you can move up closer if you'd like to. You're welcome. So anytime Frank gave the permission to do that, and so you're welcome to move closer. Anyway, this coming July 23rd, 50 years ago, by the grace of God, I was able to bring back to America the world record for the mile. First American. Thank you. First American since another Kansan by the name of Glenn Cunningham. So since 1936, 2 Kansans have held the world record for the mile, and it's very unusual. So having said that, on that day, Ann was there with part of her family, and they were interested in minor sports like baseball, basketball, and football. And on this day, they chose to come to see a major sport, track and field, at Berkeley, California. And so on that day, after I set the world record, since I was the first American since Cunningham, there's a lot of attention, autographs, media, all that kind of stuff. And about 3 hours passed. I went to the tent where all my warm-up gear had been stored, to find that somebody had early souvenirs. Everything was stolen. And so off I ran across the track back to the dormitory. And as I did, I heard this voice. And let me preface this next part by saying there are 2 really wonderful schools in Kansas. The better of the 2 is the University of Kansas. Now I say that because I heard this soft voice coming up saying, Jim, I'd like your autograph. And by the way, I go to Kansas State University. So naturally, I ran a little faster. So she ended up, actually, she didn't get her autographs that day, but Thanksgiving of 1966, we met on a blind date, and she got all the autographs for her brothers, her sisters, her aunts, her uncles, and it was quite an evening. And that was my first opportunity to really get to meet this wonderful woman. And believe me, I have a treasure in this lady. She is a special, special person. All right. Let me do just a couple of things, and I'm going to introduce a race to you. Some of you stopped by our table, and you got the little brief pamphlets. You're welcome to those afterwards. They're at the table back in the back if you're interested. I mentioned to a number of the young runners our running camps, and I'm going to mention this to you because I think it's the greatest running camp out there. We've been doing these for 42 years, and we do it with the understanding that we have an opportunity to invest in the next generation. We keep it down to 100. For that reason, we have 1-to-6 ratio. We've had Ryan Hall. Anybody know the name Ryan Hall? His wife, Sarah. Ryan came to our camp when he was a sophomore in high school. 420 miler, went home, ran 4:04, almost 4 minutes. So we work hard on understanding the mechanics, all the things that go into camp. If you're interested, there's a copy of these in the back. And then I'll mention this as well, Courage to Run. It's a book that we've written over the last, I don't know how many years it's been in the process of being put together. We still have a few copies. If you're interested in a signed one, birthdays, Easter, all sorts of things coming up, and we'll be happy to help you with that. All right, now, she does a great job. Just make sure you count your change. So this morning, as we talked to the 5th graders, she mentioned to them that as a young boy growing up in Wichita, I had the measles. And with the measles, I lost approximately half of my hearing. In fact, tonight I'm a little bit handicapped because one of my hearing aids, which is in the canal, failed and the other one is not there or is in. So I'm hearing about half of what most people say when they're back asking questions. So I apologize for that. But through the years, I was able to, because of the hearing impairment that I've had, work with hearing impaired children. And it's such a great opportunity to sit down and talk with them and encourage them that if you have a hearing loss, it doesn't have to keep you from excelling and doing well. And so I put together a program called Sounds of Success. I would go into a city, work with the media, and we had hearing impaired children would come in and I'd talk with them, and we do a little foot race, say from that side of the room to that side, and they'd always win. And then I would sit down with them and show them a race that you're going to see in just a moment. It was a world record at 3:51.1 in Bakersfield, California. And on this particular occasion, when we had finished and I had dismissed them, everyone left except this one little boy sitting in a small chair. I went back and sat down with him, and when you do in those days, your knees come up into your chin, and put my arm around him. I said, what was it about that race that impressed you? And I'm thinking, he's sitting beside the guy who was the world record holder in the mile. He's probably really impressed by the fact that here I am beside him. And I said, what was it about that race that impressed you? And he looked at me and he said, I've never seen black and white television before. And he got up and left. So I want to introduce to you ABC Wild World of Sports, black and white television. Whoever's going to turn it on, it'll be up in just a moment. We have the actual logos. This is before ESPN1, ESPNU, all those ESPN stations. But back in 1967, this would become a new world record at a mile, and I'll come back and share with you some more stories in just a moment. Yeah, we do. There you go.
Audio?
You need this? Dang, they went. That's when you had people to track me.
I want to mention Dr. Jack Daniels. He's in the area. A lot of people know
I will
him.
do that. I'm going to do that next. Yeah, thanks.
Time to say goodbye to
Well, Jim, I'll say that you can't break 3 minutes, you may as well break the world record. And I think Jim Ryan unofficially has broken his own world record. He looked exceptionally strong the entire way. Perhaps it would have helped if he could have seen the pivot on someone to run that first quarter for him. It's just about a half a second to 1 second faster than it was actually negotiated. This is a tremendous performance when you figure, as you saw here, never at any time in the first 10 yards of the race did he have any competition with. No, he led every foot of the race. He accelerated at the start like a sprint. I'm locked right now. He won that first lane. He didn't want any other runner to be in his way. Stand by for the official time. We'll be back in a minute. The National Outdoor Track and Field Championship.
Here you go, Dane. Dane, thank you. Thank you. All right, wow. Dane did a good job, didn't he? Made sure that microphone was in the right place. I want to mention a name I think you're familiar with, some of you in this area, Dr. Jack Daniels. He's one of the most recognized exercise physiologists. He made a point, he comes to camp every summer. He made a point last summer. I don't think he originated it, but he might have. It takes about 10,000 hours of doing something well before you get to the point of being excellent. And that might have been 11,000 hours before that one happened. But the point is, it takes a lot of time to get there, and I think sometimes we forget that excellence requires something, and it requires an awful lot of people to help you. Now, it mentioned at the very beginning that I wanted to lead the race. I really didn't. It was our national championships. Once I got into the lead, I couldn't get rid of it. It was one of those things, there I was, and the young man who was finishing second, or was second early on in the race, and I'll mention his name, Tim Danielson. He was the second high school boy to run under 4 minutes. This is particularly aimed at some of the young people in here. The small decisions you make in life add up to big decisions at some point. And I say that because 2 years ago we were celebrating the first high school 4-minute mile. I think it was a month later, or was a year later. A month later, Tim Danielson, the young man that was second, was being put in prison for having murdered his wife and trying to commit suicide. And I think along the way he made some very poor decisions, and that's why it's important for moms and dads and coaches. You have an opportunity to make great input into the young athletes' lives and to your children. So don't ever underestimate what that really means. So I congratulate you, keep it up. I also want to thank Frank for giving me the opportunity to come tell a bit of this story. Because when you hear some of my story, I hope it will encourage you, because you see excellence, but let's go back to the beginning. I grew up in Wichita, Kansas, and I met somebody who is from there tonight. Somebody who's from Wichita back over here. And so we were talking a little bit about Wichita. It's an interesting place. It's got a lot of wind. Gets very cold in the winter and very hot in the summer. And I'm glad that I grew up there. I had some wonderful values. In fact, as a little boy growing up, as I told the 5th graders today, I was known as the grade school nerd. And I think you know what that implies. You just can't say the right things. You can't do the right things. People make jokes out of your life, and so that's where I was. And so as a young boy growing up in Wichita, probably about 5th or 6th grade, we were just experimenting. Black and white television was coming on, and so I would come home after school and I'd turn on television, and my favorite program, one of my favorite programs right after Howdy Doody, was the old black and white series of Superman. And I thought he was really cool because he rescued the pretty girls, he captured the bank robbers, and if you're the school nerd, who wouldn't want to be just like him? So one day when the show was over and I was really psyched up, I thought, man, this guy is really cool. I had great imagination. I thought, why don't I go into my mom's cupboard, get the tallest glass that she has, and yes, I will make a drink that will give me the same powers as Superman. So I went in and I opened up the refrigerator, and by the way, the recipe's not in the book, but the story is, so don't try it, it doesn't actually work. But anyway, I got in the refrigerator, I got in the cupboard, got the tallest glass, and then I went to the refrigerator. And I don't know what your mom had in her refrigerator, but this is a little bit of a summary of what my mom had. And I put each one of them in there. Coke, milk, the pickle juice, Tabasco sauce, mustard, everything that was there. And then because I knew it was going to be very successful and it was a one-time recipe, I went into the spice cupboards. And yes, I got all the spices. Salt, pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, I mean, anything that was in there. Stirred it up, went on the back steps of the porch, and I stepped out on the first step and I looked to make sure the neighbors are not watching, because it's very important if you're going to have Superman #2 that he be disguised. So I stood there for a moment, I took a drink of this glass and nothing happened. I thought, well, probably I have to drink it all. And that was when I regretted the fact that I'd gotten such a tall glass. Somehow I got it all down, and now I'm looking to make sure the neighbors aren't looking, and this time I bend over, put my hands up over my head with great confidence, and I'm going to start flying around the backyard. But nothing happened. And that was part of my imagination journey that would be a part of my life forever, in terms of just kind of dreaming big, so to speak. We talk about this in camp. Dream big. Most people are afraid to dream big because they're afraid they're going to fail. Guess what? You are going to fail. And if you find out where your strengths are by failing, you'll find out the gifts that God has given you. So I somehow, sports was coming along, and I wanted to be a sports person. So the first sport I went out for was baseball, that minor sport that Ann's family really liked. I went out for baseball. And this was my sequence. I started at outfield, and then I graduated to the infield, and I graduated even further to the bench. And then I graduated from being cut from the team, and it was the church baseball team. So it wasn't like I had a great calling in my life for baseball. So undaunted, when I went into junior high, I was tall for my age. I went out for the junior high basketball team because I just knew I was going to be discovered. I wanted to be a great basketball player. My father put a goal up over the garage, and I'd worked on the layup at the end of the game that would win everything, and I just knew it was going to happen. So first day of gym happened to be the same day that the gym teacher was the basketball coach, and he said, I want you out for my team. And of course, my estimation of how great I was going to be grew even more. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. This guy's discovered me. So I went for the team. And we practiced. And about halfway through, perhaps you've had this happen as well, but if you haven't, it was just sort of an interesting time. Coach said, I want to have a meeting with you in my office. And I thought, wow. I mean, I'm going to be an NBA basketball player, and he's discovered me, and a lot of money, big name, and all that stuff. And so when practice was over, I met him in his office, and this is how it began. He said, now, Jim, he said, did you notice there's a difference in the way you play basketball and the way the other boys play? Coach, I'm working on that. By the time I get to high school, I bet I have a really great game. And this is what he said, I think you will too. In fact, when you finish with your shower, hang your single on the door. I'll see you back in the gym class, and maybe when you get to high school, you will have developed a basketball game. So that was kind of my journey. In fact, let me throw in a congressional story. When I went back in my district, I would go through different parts of it, and often I would share a little bit of this story with the schools. I'd walk into the classroom, and the teachers would say, we have a wonderful program here. And I would say, well, what's that? And they would say, well, we have a no-fail sports program. And I would walk them through what had happened with me, explaining that failure can be a great teacher if you allow it to be that way. In fact, I think some young people today have never experienced failure, so when they become an adult, it's a really tough thing. So junior high sports, there weren't very many in Wichita at that point, but my next sport was junior high track and field, and I just knew that I had found my sport. So I went for the team, and I recognize now, so to speak, I'm worldly wise. I mean, I'm now going to become a sprinter. In those days, it was 50 yards. And I noticed that as the coach talked to the 50-yard guys, that when he finished talking, there were fewer of them. So what I did is I became a hurdler. And I noticed that as he started talking to the hurdlers, there were fewer of them. I became a pole vaulter. And then eventually became a high jumper and a quarter miler. You know, I stayed out for 3 years for the team. I never got cut from the team, but I never made the team. But that's where I was in my life at that point. I wanted my life to amount to something, and this is going back to the little prayer that Ann mentioned earlier. I was churched at that point, and yes, I was discouraged. I don't think anyone goes through life without having some moments of discouragement. But when you have those moments, how do you deal with them? And I kept remembering on Sundays the pastor talking about prayer. So I started this little routine. Every night I go to bed after these experiences in junior high, while I'm still in the middle of that junior high track and field situation, I'd say, Dear Lord, I really want my life to amount to something. And I think you can all identify with that because we all do. And I would say, I'd really like my life to amount to something. And right now it's not going well. And I'd say, if you could have something show up in sports where I could excel, I'd really appreciate that. And then I'd go to sleep. And I think probably after 3 years of hearing the same prayer every night, something very special happened. I went out for the high school cross-country team. And by the way, I knew nothing about cross-country. But the longest distance you could run in junior high in Kansas in those days was 1 lap around the track. And I'm dating myself. It was then 440 yards, not 400 meters. 440 yards. And so going to a school in Wichita called Wichita East, I went out. I didn't want to play football. I didn't like hitting people. And I thought, there's another sport in the fall, it's cross country. And so I had this little guy who became a wonderful, so to speak, father, mentor, and everything else, got up and talked about a sport I'd never heard about. In fact, it was a school of 3,000. Had to have a double assembly. I was in the back row. And I kept seeing this little guy on the stage, and he said cross country. I thought, let's go out for the cross country team. Why not? So I went out for the team. We had about 100 guys, and this is my first day in practice. So when you see a race like that, I want you to keep in mind first day of practice. We meet in front of the gym, 100 guys. Then it turns out one of the captains said, we're ready to go up to College Hill Park. And I thought, that's kind of interesting. How far away is that anyway? And after about a quarter of a mile, I realized it was much further than I'd ever run before. And so we're running uphill, and we get up to this little park, and it was a mile. I started out kind of to the front. By the time I got there, I was all the way in the back. And then we did a few wind sprints and a few calisthenics, and I discovered for the first time in my life that was what they call a warm-up. I'd never done a warm-up before. So I thought, gee, that's like a workout for me. I'd never, here we are, I've done a mile and all this stuff. Well, for the next hour and a half, and this little park was hilly and around trees. We ran up and down hills and around trees, and I kept falling further and further back. And then finally someone said, well, the workout's over, it's time to go home. I thought, that's going to be great, because it was slightly downhill back to gym, and I was grateful for that. I got home, Mom had saved dinner, and I saw my mom, and I said, Mom, I'm skipping dinner, I'm going to bed, I'm too tired. Now, this is really in the days before we understood much about Advil. You know what it's like when you've done too much? So the next morning, I really couldn't get out of bed. I sort of rolled out of bed, shared a downstairs bedroom with my brother, walked up the stairs backwards to the kitchen. I said, Mom, I'll be home early. I'm not going to do that cross-country stuff anymore. How many of you have ever said that before? You've had that experience. It's hard, and yet in those hard experiences, God uses those moments to really teach you valuable lessons. I went to school. We had 3 flights of stairs. I went up and down 3 flights of stairs for 6 periods. First period, I said, no, I'm not going to do this cross-country stuff. By the time I got to the 6th period, I found myself back out for the cross-country team. It was not easy. Anybody had shin splints before? I had shin splints the first 6 weeks that I ran. I had everything that you could think about that would go wrong, but for some reason, I wanted to stay out for the team. And I made the team. Now, the varsity year 1 through 7, I didn't make that part. Junior varsity 7 through 14, I didn't make that part either. We were the C team. I was 21st man on the C team. And I thought, I've made a team finally. God's answered my prayers. And as small as that was, there's a wonderful verse in the Bible that says, do not despise the day of small beginnings. You see, for me, it was finding something I could do. And I thought it was great. I put soap in the soap dishes and towels out and took care of the varsity and junior varsity, and then this incredible thing happened. The next 6 weeks, after the 6 weeks of shin splints, I went from last man on the cross-country team to first man on the cross-country team. I ended up finishing 6th in the state meet. We won the state meet, running barefoot in the snow in Kansas. And when we were finished, I got a letter jacket. I thought, how cool is this? There's got to be a girlfriend right with this someplace. And so, you know, that was the beginning of my very first running experience. And I have to say, you've all gone through this, and if you still remember those moments, you know, they were very challenging, but you learned something from that. And I thank God for those experiences and the people I had to work with. So along came the first season of track and field, and in Kansas, cross country was 2 miles, not 3,200 yards or whatever, it was 2 miles. So I, being inexperienced in all of this, thought when the track season started, they'd have a 2-mile race. That would come about 30 years later, because the longest distance they had in Kansas was a 1-mile race. And I thought, I'm a 2-miler, I don't want to race a mile. And so, you know, I found myself trying out for the distance of a mile on the East High track and field team. My very first time mile, by the way, was 5:38. I mean, you don't light any great stories out of all that. It was rather slow, but it was 5:38. We get to the time trial before our first meet, and I finished second in a 3-man group running 4:50. And I thought, that's cool, you know, 5:38 to 4:50, I'm getting better. So I get to go to my first meet, first track meet, cinder tracks. How many of you guys have run on cinder tracks before? There are a few of you. How many don't know what cinders are? Okay, cinders are really great to run on. Don't ever fall on them because they're kind of hard to pick out of your shins and everything. So we go to our first meet, and I go up to one of the seniors on the team, and I said, how do you run this race? I mean, I'm a sophomore. And I knew it was 4 laps around the track. And I don't know whether he said it in a funny manner, but he said, you stay with the leaders, and then with half a lap to go, you out sprint everybody else. When you're a sophomore, you're pretty gullible, and I thought that's a cool idea. So, you know, here we are. There's 8 schools, 3 from each school, 24 guys on the starting line. That's a really crowded starting line, staggered around the track. About half a lap or 2 laps into it, there are fewer. With a half a lap to go, there's this other guy. The 2 of us are together. And I remembered this because you've gone through it too. You're hurting, but you're trying to remember what that guy told you. He said, start sprinting, half a lap to go. So I started sprinting. And we exchanged the lead over the last little bit. We get to the finish line. I'm the inexperienced runner. I run through standing straight up. The other guy leans at the finish line and wins. Now I'm past the finish line. In a runner's pose, what's that? This is what a runner's pose is. You're down, your hands are on your knees, you're gasping for air, and you're saying all those things, sometimes silently. Why am I doing this? Everything hurts. I'll never do it again. Right? And then one of my buddies ran up and he said, you know who you lost to? I said, yeah, that guy in the red and white jersey. He said, you know who he is? And I said, I don't have any idea. He said, he's the defending state champion at 1 mile. And all of a sudden, my side didn't hurt quite as much. And then one of my other teammates ran up and said, you know what your time was? I said, I don't have any idea. He said, you ran 4:32. So in 10 days, I'd improved by 18 seconds. And I thought, you know, I think I kind of like being a miler. And that's how it all began. This amazing journey. I never lost another high school mile. And in less than 18 months, I'm on my first Olympic team. I'm going to the Tokyo Olympics. Just at that period of time, and Frank would know this, I ran under 4 minutes as a high school boy. I had a wonderful coach who, he expected more out of me than I thought I had. And so for the young athletes here, don't get angry at your coach when he's asking you to do some things you think you can't do. He's reaching down inside of your character and he's looking at molding you and helping you. And God's given him some wisdom, and that's why he's there. And you're like clay on a potter's wheel, you're being molded. And I have to confess, there were a lot of times it wasn't a lot of fun. But I began slowly to see this enormous progress. In fact, when I ran under 4 minutes for the first time, I looked at it this way. It was Coach's goal. I had adopted it, but it was his goal. Now I want you to follow me on this because I think this is true in life for all of us, whether you're an athlete, an adult, whatever. When do you take ownership of your life? On that night when I ran under 4 minutes for the first time, I started thinking, wow, what happens if I do maybe an extra wind sprint or maybe a little extra weightlifting or whatever? What might happen? You see, that's one thing we talk about in camp. I was taking ownership of it. And there's a big difference between participation and ownership. And I want to challenge you, no matter where you are in life, there's a difference. Don't be just a participant, be an owner. Find out a way that you can go even further, whatever it might be in your life. Your calling, whether it's in politics, whether it's teaching, coaching, be a pastor. You know, God has given you a gift. And it's really your privilege to develop that particular gift. It goes back to the story I showed you, talked about earlier. You know, sometimes we look at failure as awful, and yet failure can be a marvelous teacher if you allow it to be. Had I never failed at all those early sports, I would never become a miler. You wouldn't have seen that race up there. I've been trying something out there in a minor sport like baseball, you know, trying to excel. So part of my journey, let me share a little bit more of my journey, because there would be the Olympics in 1964. 1968, I'd win a silver medal, second place. By the way, a silver medal is the same size as a gold medal. However, we placed so much emphasis on the gold, it was like, if you got a silver, why did you even show up? I remember coming home to my hometown newspaper, and the newspaper said, Ryan only gets second, only wins a silver medal. And I thought, wow, if they only knew the hours, I could have, you know, done something a little better perhaps, but that's what it was. I was learning through experience some of those challenges in life that would actually prepare me for the political life that Ann and I would go through, that not everybody's going to agree with your particular position. So along the way came another Olympics in 1972, and I was having what I would call a mountain experience and a valley experience. The mountains were fantastic. I was running right at the top of the world. And then the next week, for some reason, I might be down in Death Valley not running well. So it was an up and down experience. And yet we were trying to get ready for the next Olympics, which is 1972. And finally, everything did settle down. Now, one of the things that helped settle me down took place May 18th, 1972. Before that, just a few months before, I started running into Christians, and Christians started sharing with me, you know, what it was to be loved by God and that God has a plan for your life. And I thought, that's really cool, but I've been churched all my life, and so what is this all about? So I started realizing there was a difference between being churched and a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so one night, Ann and I knelt and we prayed and invited Jesus Christ to come into our lives. And this was transforming in this sense, because what I've shared with you, you can see my life was measured in tenths of a second. When I ran well, people loved me. I mean, I was on the cover of Sports Illustrated 7 times. I was in the front of Newsweek, all kinds of great accolades, world records. But when I didn't run well, whatever the circumstances might be, I'd get a postcard in the mail many times, quitter. Why did you even show up? Or I'd have some that would say, take your wedding band off your hand and you'll have even balance in your hands, and that problem of going away with why you can't win. But on that night when I became a Christian, I want to share this with you. It was as if God said to me, I don't care how fast you run, you can't earn my love. I love you for who you are. And for me, with all those stories that I told you along the way, I've been trying to earn that particular value. And I realized on that night, that was a transformational moment. And it would become very important about 3 months later that I would go into my third Olympics, 1972. I was the favorite to win the Olympic gold medal. I don't know how many of you might remember back then, you had this group called the Black Septembrists. Anybody kind of remember that? You back? The Black Septembrists broke into the Olympic Village, killed a number of Israeli athletes, had a terrible shootout at the airport. The commandos, the terrorists, everybody else were killed. And then they resumed the Olympics the next day, and the next day was my first round of competition. My first round of competition, of which there were 3. Opening round, about 500 yards from the finish line, I'm bumped by another runner, I fall, I hit my head on the rail, and I'm temporarily unconscious, get back up, finish the race. But I'm stunned. You know, here I am the favorite. I'd won a silver medal 4 years before. I'm running well now, but now I've fallen. And somehow out of the stands, and to this day we've talked about this, doesn't know how she did it, because you had 80,000 participants. You had military at exits and entrances with their finger on a gun. They didn't know whether you were a good or bad guy. And somehow Ann had gotten out of the stadium stands, had walked down to the passage between the competition track and the warm-up track. And we met each other, we embraced, and we simply said a prayer, dear God, this isn't our plan. Please help us. And the officials came up and said, you'll be reinstated, and everybody agreed. And then they all left us, and here we are standing, embracing each other, praying, and now what do we do? And so we start walking back to the Olympic Village, and we're walking by the ABC television booth. And they were the ones covering the 1972 Olympics. And I remember an acquaintance I'd made in there. Some of you will remember his name, kind of a arrogant, how do I say, Monday Night Football announcer by the name of Howard Cosell. We had struck up a friendship. And so we walked by and I said, Howard's an attorney. Let's walk in and ask if he'll help us. We sat down and he said this to me. He said, Jimmy, sit down, we're going to write a petition, and you'll be right back in those games tomorrow. So I wish I had it still, because we had to give it to the IOC, the International Olympic Committee. We wrote a petition explaining my viewpoint that I'd been fouled by another runner. 3 of us had fallen. We wanted to be reinstated based upon those particular positions. We submitted it to the IOC, and this was their response. They met us the next day, and they said, you know, real unfortunate what happened to you. And the guy had a tie on. I know you don't have a tie on, but he had a tie on. And he walked up to me and he said, why don't you come back in 4 years and try again? Now, being the nice, polite Kansan that I was, I wanted to reach out and grab him by his tie. And then I wanted to pound on him some, because you know in your own life when something doesn't go well your way, it's very disappointing. But because I had just become a Christian, I realized that wasn't the response I needed to have. And so we walked away, and for a number of months, actually years, there went this period of time when I was very frustrated and angry. I thought, gosh, all this work Ann and I put into it, Coach Timmons, my wonderful coach, and then to have an official say, why don't you come back in 4 years and try again? Now here's the key to this. The next Olympics, as I recall, they started, if you were in the opening round like I was, if there was a fall, which happens in international competition, they would reinstate you. You still had to qualify for the next round and the next round. But that wasn't the case in Munich. So fast forward from 1972 to 1984, and I'll wrap it up after this. 1984, we're at the LA Olympics in Los Angeles, and we had some of the best seats in the house. And those are the ones that are so far up you can see just barely anybody on the track. In fact, in those days, it was the very beginning of the Jumbotron screens. I mean, now we expect it at any kind of sporting event. So they have large Jumbotron screens. And we're watching, it's the final day of track and field, and it's fabulous. You got the finals of the 1500, the marathons come in, and they're having the finals of the high jump. And I'm watching the big screen, Jumbotron screen, if you will, and I'm watching the high jump, and I look on the screen, I look at the high jump. Down on the field, it's like a little ant. This guy's walking by. And then on the screen, he's about 20 feet tall. And wouldn't you know, it's that same guy who 12 years before said, why don't you come back in 4 years and try again? I want you to know what I wanted to do in 1972, I no longer wanted to do in 1984. Unlike Donald Trump, I have learned forgiveness and how important it is. So I knew on that occasion that the best thing to do was forgive that man and move on. And I'm so grateful, because it transformed our lives. It's one of those moments that really changed everything. And so, Frank, I want to thank you for the privilege of sharing. I don't know where we go from here. I don't know whether we questions out the door, or you can tell me what you want to do. But I want to thank you all for listening. Let me just say this. Frank asked if I wanted to come. And I said, well, is it formal or informal? He says, very informal. And I said, sign me up. I can wear my running shoes. And so it's been a real pleasure to meet all your friends and this wonderful running community. You guys are just fabulous. Stories. See, over here, way back in what year was it? 96. Pardon me?
1996.
1996 in Joplin, Missouri, at Southwest Missouri. There was, a junior AAU event. You had some of your athletes there. And I remember that moment because it was 6 hours of signing autographs. I mean, we had kids coming from all over the place. So it was a wonderful event, and there's so many other stories that could be shared at this point. I know, Ann, you had a hand up. You wanted to share something?
Will you share with them about what Timmy told you when you said after a cold day running, you went in and you said, I want to do this?
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is kind of part of the ownership thing. It goes for these young guys. All of you, actually, but this one particularly young guys. Coach Timmons had decided, more on his part because of some math that he had done, seeing my progression, that I could be the first high school boy to run under 4 minutes. And I went along with some hesitation, thinking, wow, this is quite something. I have, finally made a team, and I know when I'd run 4:32, everything hurt, my legs hurt, my lungs hurt. I couldn't see anything faster. And so during that next winter of 1964, I'm training on my own because you couldn't work up a coach. And I'm running in Wichita in what's called the field house. That's a round circular basketball arena, but there's a rubber mat on the inside you can go and train on. And I'm running outside in the dark and the cold. And one day I went in to see Coach Simmons and said, Coach, this is really hard. I mean, I'm tired, it's cold, there's nobody out there, there's nobody to run with. I just don't know if I can do this. And I'm looking for a pat on the back, right? Now let me explain this. First of all, Coach Timmons is a very loving person. but he's also a Marine that served in World War II. A very strong disciplinarian. In fact, he always told his teams that if he had a policy, if you want to drink, you're not on the team. And so he was a state champion like 7 years in a row in swimming, 8 years in cross country, and 8 years in track. And the only reason he lost one of the state meets in swimming is because his juniors decided to go out and test that particular rule right after the state meet. They went out and got drunk. He had a meeting with them the next day and he said, "Congratulations, guys, you're off the team. I'll see you later on. You're done. I told you what the rules were." He lost the state meet the next year. So having said that, I went in to see Coach Timmons, hoping I could get a pat on the back. And he said, what he said to me, he said, "Jim, if you don't want to do this, it's never going to happen." I said, "Well, that's not a pat on the back, that's a kick in the rump." You know, he said, "It's your choice." I thought, well, yeah, it's my choice, but don't I get a little sympathy? And no, he was having me learn that life is full of choices and full of decisions, and it comes down to what you want to do with your life. And I walked away from that office, and it took me a day or two to kind of process it all because I had expected a certain answer, but I got a different one. And I realized he was right. That you are the ones that have so much control over your own destiny. God's given you some talent. He's given you people to help, but you have to do it. And so that's the story basically. Coach Timmons, you know, instead of the pat on the back, he gave me a little kick in the rump and sent me out the door and said, "Figure that out." And I said, "Okay, I did." Okay, I don't want to keep everybody here. Frank, I'm going back to you, I guess. Thank you very much for listening. God bless you all.